today's topic is building a healthier life, the impact of sleep, stress and social connections. So we just give people a few minutes to join us and we'll kick off. Okay, hi everybody, I think we'll get started. So as I said, today is the second in our webinar series for National Arthritis Week, which runs all week from 31st of March to 6th of April. And the theme for this year's National Arthritis Week is lifestyle medicine. And today I'm delighted to have some excellent speakers with us to talk about the topic of building a healthier life, the impact of sleep, stress and social connections. My name is Tara Regan and I'm Communications and Advocacy Manager at Arthritis Ireland. So I'm going to just give you a little quick overview of what Arthritis Ireland does, and then I'll hand over to our speakers. So as I mentioned, it's National Arthritis Week, and the goal of this week is to raise awareness and empower individuals with the knowledge and skills to better manage their condition and to improve their health outcomes. So we have 3 webinars this week, and today's is the second in the series. If anyone missed the webinar on Tuesday, it's on our YouTube channel and also in our webinars page. And we also have another webinar tomorrow, which is a taster online Tai Chi session with Kevin Copeland. So I hope those of you with us today might be able to join us tomorrow. That's at 1 o'clock. But as always, you can watch back any of our webinars on our website, arthritisireland.ie. Just to give you a little overview of what we do, so we're the charity and patient organisation for those who live with arthritis. We deliver support, training, education and information. And we have a lot of information on our website that you might find useful. So we have booklets, we have webinars, podcasts, recorded interviews with clinicians and rheumatologists. And we also have a lot of information about our self-management programs, which are designed to give people the skills to better manage their condition. We also have a national helpline, which is open from Monday to Friday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. for support and information, and also to register for those programs. And that number is 0818 252 846. And the helpline is manned by volunteers who either live with arthritis or have experience of caring for somebody who does. As we are a charity, we also rely on the generosity of the public to ensure that we can continue to provide the vital supports and services that we offer to people living with arthritis. So if you want to show your support for Arthritis Ireland, you can make a once-off donation or a monthly donation to Arthritis Ireland, or indeed you might want to join a team of fundraisers and register for the VHI Women's Mini Marathon this June, and you can register for that on our website as well. So I'm delighted today to introduce our 3 speakers, and we really appreciate them giving their time and expertise to us today. So first up we have Dr. Lisa Mellon, and Dr. Lisa Mellon is a health psychologist and humanistic psychotherapist, and she lectures on health behaviour change theory at the RCSI and is a certified lifestyle medicine practitioner. Dr. Alan Maddock is a lecturer in psychology at the Department of Health, Psychology in the School of Population Health at RCSI, University of Health and Medical Sciences, and Alan is also a professionally qualified social worker who worked for a number of years as a mental health social worker. And then we also have Dr. Maria Pertl, and Maria is a lecturer in the Department of Health Psychology in the RCSI, and Maria has completed a diploma in lifestyle medicine with the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine and is on the committee of the Irish Society for Lifestyle Medicine. So I just want to thank you all again for joining us today. And just a little note to let everybody know that the session is recorded and you'll be able to watch it back if you have to leave early. But if you do have any questions, we'll take them at the end. If you can put them into the Q&A function in the webinar, then we will address as many of them as we can before we finish up today. So thanks again, and I'm delighted to hand over to Lisa.
Okay, so we spend a third of our lives asleep. Which really shows it deserves our attention in terms of improving its quality or making it as good as it can be. So its function is really for rest and repair. It's where the body regenerates itself. And I won't get into the specifics of the stages of sleep, but really we have deep sleep, light sleep, and REM sleep, so rapid eye movement sleep. So light sleep comes first, and that's where the body relaxes itself and slows down and keeps us in that still state, because then we move into deep sleep, and that's important for where all the regeneration of the system happens. And then REM sleep is basically where the brain repair happens in terms of, improving our memory, our recall, our problem solving, and so on. So really all three stages function for different reasons. And it's important that we, I suppose, have as less broken sleep as possible. In terms of what influences sleep, we have biological factors in terms of this keeps jumping on me, I'm very sorry. In terms of, I suppose, the biology of the body and what is going on inside. And then we also have behavioral factors in terms of health behaviors that we, sorry, this keeps jumping on me, health behaviors that we carry out during the day and also in the lead up to our sleep. And then we have social factors, because if we think about it, we live in this world where we're constantly connected. We're bombarded with information 24/7, and we unfortunately spend a lot of time engaging in media, whether that's social media or television. We can have very sedentary lifestyles, and we also relax through sedentary pastimes like social media or watching TV, and we'll talk about that in terms of blue light in a moment. And how does sleep actually affect us day to day? And I'm sure a lot of you will identify with these if we talk about, if you have poor sleep, you can be quite sluggish the next day, have poor attention span, maybe decreased performance in your day-to-day tasks, depressed mood, our metabolism is slower, so we find it harder to burn calories. We can be more stressed, we can be less physically active because we're too tired, and then it can also affect our diet because we're going for high energy foods which tend to be less healthy. Briefly then, how does it impact on our physical health? So it affects pretty much every system in the body, and when we don't get, I suppose, insufficient sleep, but also quality of sleep, poor quality sleep, it impacts all those systems in multiple different ways in terms of mental health disorders, particularly our immune system function, and that's important when we think of rheumatoid arthritis, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, obesity, hormone imbalances, and pain. And I suppose diabetes, obesity, and cardiovascular disease in particular, yes, are affected by biological reasons, but also our health behaviors that we engage in because of poor sleep, like I mentioned, decreased physical activity, higher stress, nutrition, alcohol consumption, all of the other pillars can be impacted, which increase our risk of developing those conditions. And just to say a little bit about pain with this audience in mind, it's really a vicious cycle in that it can disrupt our sleep, but then poor sleep can worsen our pain. So it's important, if this is an issue for you, to address your, what we call sleep hygiene, which we'll talk about now, to optimize your sleep as best as you can, given your environment. But if pain is still a factor, it will be important to engage with your team, so your rheumatology team or us or orthopedic surgeon, in terms of pain management, what you're taking and what times of the day or night you take that, and whether that can be optimized then to help your sleep. So, okay, I'm going to run into what we call sleep hygiene, and that really just talks about all of the behaviors you engage in during the day and leading up to sleep. To again optimize hopefully good duration and quality of sleep. And before I start, there's an excellent podcast on the Inflammation Nation podcast series by Arthritis Ireland with Professor Annie Curtis, who is an immunologist in RCSI and a body clock specialist. And she would talk, and that's where I suppose the circadian rhythms throughout the day and night in our body and how that affects our health. And she would talk about the number one factor that's most important for maintaining a regular body clock is light exposure. And that is getting out in the light as early as possible in the day to again set that body clock correctly. So, getting as much light during the day as possible, but particularly in the morning. And then in terms of blue light, and this is where I think the majority of us struggle. So blue light comes from devices, things like your phone, the television, a laptop, iPad, whatever it is. And if we think about it, and Professor Annie Curtis has a good way of saying it, in that blue light is what tells your body to get up and go. So if you're looking at television last thing before bed, or you're looking at your phone, you're basically telling your brain to stay awake and to be active. And that's, you want the opposite to that. So we really need to look at our behaviors around particularly phone use. Can you turn it off an hour before bed or not look at it? Or particularly turn down the light settings on your phone so it's as dark as possible if you have to look at it. And then maybe reevaluate, can you read a book in the last hour before bed instead of watching television? Because again, it's enjoyable, but it could be very harmful to your sleep. Caffeine is another big one, and I would suggest Professor Matt Walker has some short podcasts where he talks about all of the different factors that influence sleep. And he would talk about caffeine intake. And I think this is a problem for a lot of us, again, in this modern society. And caffeine has what's called a half-life of 5 to 6 hours. So what that means is if you have your last coffee at 2 p.m., if you get to 7 p.m., 50% of that caffeine is still in your body. So your body hasn't cleared all of the caffeine. And then if you fast forward another 5 hours to midnight, you still have a quarter of that caffeine in your body. So caffeine is a psychoactive substance. It keeps us alert, but it also increases our anxiety. And there are two things you don't want when you're trying to go to sleep. And some people would say, sorry, my slides keep jumping here. They would say that, I have coffee late at night and I'm a good sleeper. But actually, research would show that the quality of their sleep would be poor. So there'd be less deep sleep. And again, that's important for body repair. So, maybe have a double think about how you intake caffeine in your day, because it could be a factor. Again, in terms of substance use, alcohol can be a factor because people say, well, a drink before bed relaxes me and I sleep better. Yes, it's a sedative, so you fall asleep quicker, but because the body has to clear the alcohol, you're then dysregulating sleep cycles as you move through the night. So again, it's not ideal. If we're physically active, it has a dual function. If you exercise outside, you're getting that light exposure, particularly in the morning. So if you go for a walk during the day, try and make it in the morning. And also being physically active tires out the body. So you're actually increasing your chances of being physically tired when you go to bed, and then you're more likely to sleep. Eating late at night can be an issue, and we all are guilty of snacking late at night. But if you think about, you need to be in a restful state to have that rest and repair. If you eat too close to bedtime, your digestive system is working and you're not in that resting state. So that again impairs sleep quality. And if we talk about the bedroom environment, you would think about maybe assessing that in terms of temperature. Is it too hot or too cold? The light, are your curtains too light? Simple things like that, but also the television. If you have a television in your room, either remove it or turn it off when you're going to sleep. Because again, if you think of that blue light, it's telling you to wake up. And that is, TVs just shouldn't be in bedrooms, Trying to jump forward here. And there we go. Just coping with issues with sleep. And I think we can get obsessed with our sleep and start catastrophizing if we're not getting the optimal 8 hours and so on. And it's a vicious cycle, you not sleeping and you're stressed about this, and then you've high stress, which again impacts your sleep. And that can be very hard to break out of. But we're meant to aim for between 7 and 9 hours, but some people function quite well on 6 hours. That's their optimal. So, don't be obsessed with the numbers. If you sleep less than 5 hours regularly or more than 9 hours, that is associated with poor health. So that may need to be looked at if those are your sleep amounts. But it's important to note that the body compensates for poor sleep. So if you have a run of poor night's sleep, your body in a day or two will put you into deeper restorative sleep because, again, it's always trying to regulate that body clock. So I suppose don't panic, but also keep a sleep diary in terms of assessing what you do both during the day and also at night in the run up to bed. And maybe there's things you can adjust that can perhaps improve your sleep. So it's important to really know what you're doing during the day. Your sleep is impacted pretty much from the minute you wake up. So what you do during the day can impact you during the night. Don't lie there if you're not sleeping, because we've all been there where you can't sleep and you're getting more anxious about it and your mind is racing. So get up. In dim lighting, don't turn on the light or don't turn on bright lights and don't look at your phone. So maybe read or, pet your dog or do something relaxing, maybe have a warm drink, not coffee, and then reset yourself and go back to bed. There's lots of sleep resources out there, and I'm historically a very bad sleeper, and I'm going to share with you two that work for me, which might be useful for you. But if none of these work, so if you're trying all of these techniques, but over a couple of months it's still not working, I would consult a health professional, because maybe the sleep disorders like insomnia, sleep apnea, and sometimes in menopause, hormonal imbalances can be an issue. So it's important to speak to a health professional, and maybe medication might be needed short term. I would never advocate for medication for poor sleep, but in some instances it may be necessary. So I think that's all I have to say for now on sleep, but happy to take any questions. And I'm going to pass you over to Alan now in terms of, actually, and before I go, I'm just going to share with you two things that worked for me really well. And these are actually podcasts that are freely available on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. We're basically a narrator with a lovely, soothing voice reads stories to you. And it sounds silly, but it really, really worked for me. I have that racing mind, quite anxious. And what happens is you have a small, I suppose, mindfulness exercise, breathing. And then what happens is you focus on a story. So you're listening and focusing. So it stops the racing mind. But again, that slow, soothing voice can kind of lull you off to sleep. So one does short stories on all kinds of different topics. And then the other one, called Sleepy Bookshelves, reads books to you, famous books that we know about. I've listened to Journey to Center of the Earth, Jane Eyre, Alice in Wonderland, all of these stories, and I found them really successful. So I'm just sharing that with you. Sorry, Alan, I'll hand over to you now. I think you can take control from here on.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, and lead me in nicely to talk about mindfulness, actually. So let's see if it'll click down for me. I should have control, I think. Yeah. Great. So yeah, lovely to be with you all this morning or this afternoon now at this stage. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about mindfulness and how it works. So personally, I've been practicing mindfulness myself for about 11 years. I must say I found it hugely beneficial and my ability to regulate and manage stress and kind of develop probably a bit more self-awareness around certain things. So it's a really powerful tool. I did my PhD on how mindfulness works. I did it with people who have psoriasis, and one of the conditions that people experience with psoriasis is psoriatic arthritis. So that's really my main research interest, but I do also facilitate mindfulness groups for different groups as well. So really interesting idea. I feel it has many, many beneficial effects. I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about what it is. Does it work? How it might work? And I suppose ways that you can kind of use it. And it kind of sits kind of neatly into what Lisa was saying, particularly around sleep. Because a couple of examples I'll talk about are probably relevant to that as well. So what is mindfulness? So mindfulness is a kind of an awareness that develops by our ability to focus on the present. So focus on the present can be quite challenging when you think about the fact that, we could have very racing minds, or we could be like busy all the time. So the ability to kind of stay present can be quite challenging. So mindfulness itself is this kind of idea that the more you're able to practice engagement, specific practices that focus on the body, it allows us to develop a more of an understanding into connection between how we think, how we feel on an emotional level, but also on a physical level as well. So it's this quality of awareness where we kind of, over time, we're able to kind of sit more neatly in the context of the present. But it requires a lot of practice. So, because mindfulness is a bit like going to the gym for the mind, and it works from a neuroscientific perspective. It's like, it literally is like working a muscle in the brain, but it does require a bit of practice. And I oftentimes think it's useful to understand ourselves. If you think about a three-legged stool, and one leg being our thoughts, one leg being on an emotional level, how we feel, and the third leg being physically how we feel. If any of those three aren't functioning, those legs in the stool will fall. So if our mind is particularly overactive over time, that can cause us stress, anxiety, and it can perpetuate negative thinking processes. If our emotions are kind of causing us difficulty, well, oftentimes it'll happen again, it'll cause us challenges. And again, physically, if we are over focused on how we're feeling on a physical level, that can cause us challenges. So obviously pain can manifest, that can cause us real difficulty. Now, oftentimes what happens is we're actually really dominated by the mind, and we don't necessarily connect with the emotion at physical level as often. So what mindfulness does is it gives us an opportunity to connect the three parts of the still and help them to kind of sit neatly together. And that helps us to develop more subjective well-being. So how do we do that? I think there's two main anchors that we can use to bring ourselves to the present. So anything we engage with in our sense level. So if we hear something, see something, can kind of feel something, we're being mindful, essentially. So that's the first thing to say. But the main two anchors that are there are kind of our breathing. And that's, if you're ever doing a mindfulness practice, usually we'll start with our breathing. But the reason being that our mind can only be in one place at any one time. It can't be in the future, it can't be in the past, and the present at the same time. And oftentimes our mind will be drawn off to the future by things we're worried about, or drawn back to things from the past. But if we focus on our breathing, what happens is it helps us to bring our whole consciousness essentially to the present moment. And by doing that, it helps us to connect more with how we feel on a physical level and on an emotional level too. What that does is that helps us to kind of really connect with our internal experience, because what we can oftentimes do, if there's something's unpleasant in our experience, so again, pain or some difficult physical sensation we might be experiencing, it's very common for us to avoid it. And the way the mind will oftentimes avoid it will be kind of reacting into thinking. And that's part of the reason why we can have repeated negative thinking around things that might cause us a bit of an emotional or physical discomfort. But that thinking, if it develops over time, can become a bit more darkly laden, negative, and can develop into kind of more kind of make stress worse and more difficult to kind of cope and manage with. So what mindfulness does is it helps us to bring ourselves back to connect to the present and kind of approach both our thinking and awareness of our thinking, how we feel on an emotional level and a physical level. And what that does, that tends to allow us to approach the causes and source of stress and pain, and allow us to kind of feel them and allow them to pass. The reason being that every thought we have and pretty much every emotion we have and every physical sensation we have is transitory. It'll arise and it will pass. It's our tendency to react to them is the thing that will actually make them more present and actually exacerbate and increase stress levels. So if we actually engage with these parts of ourselves more consistently, and mindfulness practices help us to do that, what happens is we regulate those experiences more easily, and we're in a better position to be able to kind of cope with them. So what we know from the research is that people who are more mindful and can focus on the present more consistently generally incur less stress, because they're engaging with the source of stress, dealing with them rather than avoiding them. Because that old metaphor, which can be useful to think about, is if we have stress and we put our head in the sand, we're avoiding it, what happens to the stress? The stress is still there. We don't do anything about it. And oftentimes the stress gets bigger because our capacity to do something about it is reduced by sticking our head in the sand. So what mindfulness can help us to do is, again, approach, engage with our sense of selves in that particular context. And that can help us to deal and cope with some of the complexities that may come with having an illness or chronic health condition in that context. And by doing that, generally, if we are more present-centered, we will feel more subjective well-being in that context. Now, I'm going to go on the next slide about how the mind might work and how we can stay a bit more present and deal with this. But what we do know is that people who engage in mindfulness-based programs or practices generally experience less negative thinking. So worry, rumination, catastrophizing, which Lisa talked a bit about earlier, which can interrupt our sleep. If you're more present, focused on mindfulness and mindful, you tend to be able to regulate those thinking patterns more clearly by being more relaxed and calm in your body. And in that context, then you tend to be more at ease and calm and be able to reduce the stress you're experiencing. And what we do know about the evidence for mindfulness programs is increasing, and there is more need for higher quality research. But what we're kind of can start to say a bit more confidently is the fact that mindfulness does work particularly well. We're helping people cope with health conditions, and also for pain intensity can really help too. The evidence there is particularly well. And from some of the work I've been doing, looking at systematic reviews about how mindfulness programs can help mental health outcomes, the evidence suggests that, again, yes, it reduces psychological stress, depression, and anxiety. So it's the type of thing that if you can get stuck into and engage with, it can have really transformative effects on your life, really, I would suggest, based on some of the experiences I've had myself personally, but also with people that we've provided the interventions that we've developed with as well. So if you think about where we are generally on a day-to-day level with our thinking, can you say it's kind of useful to kind of think to ourselves and reflect a little bit, how often are we present focused? And the reality is not that often. The reason being that our mind is oftentimes off in the future. So if we're dealing with a stressor in our lives and we think that the stressor that we're experiencing is controllable, what the mind will try and helpfully do is worry. So the idea behind worry is that the mind is presenting every eventual thing that could happen in order to give you a sense of control and prepare you for all the things that might happen in the future. What do we know about worry? 99.9% of the thoughts that we have relating to worry do not occur in future. It don't occur in reality. So what happens is, in that context is that we develop this kind of intense or physical response. We have these kind of more difficult emotional reactions to things, and we're stuck in our mind a little bit. And what happens is that can, again, as Lisa mentioned earlier, that can affect our capacity to sleep. It can reduce our sleep quality. And actually, the thing that we need to actually deal with is actually our capacity to deal with it is reduced because of the fact that we haven't slept as well, or we're more emotionally depleted by the fact we're worrying about it in that context. And what we know about worry is that worry, more consistent levels of persistent worry, can actually lead to the development of more chronic mental health disorders like generalized anxiety disorder. So if we're stressed and we think that our mind makes the decision for us, that ultimately this is something we can control, it'll kick out all these negative thoughts. So the mind is not something necessarily, the mind is a fantastic apparatus. It's there for support us, to help us survive and function well in the world. But mindfulness helps us to recognize there's something that we can do that goes beyond our thinking, that gives us more awareness and the space to be able to observe these processes as they play out. If we're not in the future, oftentimes we can find ourselves in the past. And the reason why we can be pushed back to the past is because if the mind interprets that the stress that we're experiencing is something we cannot control, it can kick us back to other experiences we may have in the past that may replicate experiences that we haven't felt we're able to control in the past. And I don't want to go into too much detail on this, but what happens is really what the mind is doing is trying to protect us, but it's not allowing us to engage with our emotional and emotional and physical response to the stressor that's there. So it goes in and takes control, but it goes into and clicks into these modes of thinking, which can be quite difficult for us to manage. So if we're in the past and we're ruminating, again, thinking about negative things that happened to us before because we don't feel we can get out of a situation that's causing us distress, what happens is rumination, again, it's a natural thinking process, but the more we're stuck in that mode of thinking, it is very highly associated with developing a depressive disorder, depressive symptoms. So again, these are kind of natural ways of thinking that our natural responses to stress if we have an avoidant coping style with dealing with things. We don't connect with our emotional and physical experiences. So what mindfulness helps us to do is it helps us to come to the present. So if we focus on our breath, what happens is we're bringing our mind to the attention of the focus, or focusing our attention on the present moment. What that does is that breaks up cycles of worry that we might be having if our mind's gone to the future. It also breaks up cycles of rumination if it's gone to the past. Because what you're doing is you're bringing your mind to focus on the present. So your mind can't be in the future and the past and the present. It can only be one of those three things. So the awareness of that and focusing on your breathing breaks up these patterns that are causing more physical and emotional distress and allow you to focus on the present. What happens in that context is that you start to become aware of your thinking and the nature of it. But what I find is quite useful, and I had this experience last night, is that if I'm worried about something when I wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, which we often will tend to do, I just focus on my breathing. And I remind myself before I go to bed to do that, because if I focus on my breathing, the worry that's there, it starts to break up and it just comes back. And what I recognize is I connect with my body. And my body at that stage, it's 4 o'clock in the morning. I have a 1-year-old daughter who's busy day with her. My body is naturally tired. So what I'm doing is I'm stepping myself out of the mind and I'm connecting to my natural fatigue in my body. I'm putting the present. So I'm connecting my emotions, my physical sensations, my fatigue, and my thinking in the present. And I fall asleep quite quickly because I'm reducing those thought processes that are keeping me awake, kind of like what Lisa was saying. So that would be very much in line with what my Lisa might have experienced, that positive benefit by the meditation, sleeping meditation, because that's the process that would work. Sorry, I'm just going to take a sip of water. So how does mindfulness work on stress? So what we know is that mindfulness develops this kind of various positive mechanisms that we experience from ourselves. So these are kind of skills that increase our capacity to regulate how we think and feel, and be able to kind of be more present-centered in the context of how we live on a day-to-day level. So it supports this kind of general move from avoiding engaging with difficult experiences to approaching and engaging with these difficult experiences. And by doing that, it reduces subjective stress. So these mechanisms that I'm going to talk about, these build up on the basis of how much mindfulness practice you do. So mindfulness practices, again, like they can be initially easy to do for like 20, 30 seconds. But if you have a very busy mind, it's like learning to drive a car, going to the gym. straight away, you're not necessarily going to be able to kind of keep the present focus for a minute or two. It's like a couch to 5K situation. You do a bit of running, you stop the run. It's the same with mindfulness practices. You should build up incrementally, but the more you build up incrementally, the more you'll start to see some of these patterns build up. And the first one is you develop an ability to decenter. So what decentering is you get the ability to regulate your attention. And what that means is you start to observe, because when you're meditating, you start to observe that your mind comes in, and you start to recognize that actually by staying focused in the present through a breathing exercise or through a body scan, which is a practice you'd learn in the initial phase of a mindfulness program, that you're able to actually be able to aware that your thinking processes are just there. They're not something that take over. They'll take over your consciousness, but they are there to be something that can be observed objectively. And the metaphor for that, which can be quite useful, is the idea that all thoughts are like clouds. They arise, and they will also pass. It's our tendency to be overtaken by them is the aspect that'll tend to mean that they take over our consciousness, and ultimately then it can lead to more negative thinking, rumination, worry. So the more we focus on the present, the more we're able to step back from that and be aware that our thinking is just thinking. And if we can be aware of it, it'll just arise and pass. We have more control over it and more ability to respond productively to it, particularly in times of stress, because we recognize the stresses that we're experiencing are transitory. So the next mechanism of action that mindfulness helps us with is attachments. So one of the things that can, like pain, for example, is not just a physical reaction to something, it also has an emotional undercurrent to it. So if we have an attachment to being pain-free or not wanting to experience something, what happens is that can again increase negative thoughts about the condition that we're experiencing. So with the attachments, if you are going to disengage, the more you're able to kind of develop a connection to how you think and feel and understand it, the more you start to recognize these attachments to things that actually drive negative thinking or drive difficult emotional responses to certain things. So if you have an outcome that you feel you absolutely must need to be happy or to have an experience of well-being, if you're able to, mindfulness actually supports the capacity called non-attachment. We're able to sort of observe these attachments again objectively and see them arise, see their negative effects if you hold on to it too strongly, and also allow it to pass. So again, it tends to take the need for things that probably aren't that important in the wider scheme of your life into account to a certain degree, because you may be caught up in something that you feel you need, but you may not actually need. Sorry, now these slides are, I'd like to see them if I can. Yeah, and then so the next two mechanisms that are particularly beneficial on an emotional level are acceptance and self-compassion. So decentering and attachments and non-attachment are generally skills that develop like early on in your mindfulness journey. So you develop these abilities quite relatively quickly, and you can see them relatively quickly, particularly if you've got support within the context of a mindfulness program. Concepts like acceptance and self-compassion are really strong in helping us to deal with the difficult emotions that may come when having a chronic health condition or that can come more generally. So acceptance is a process of just kind of embracing whatever you're feeling in the present moment, whether it's a difficult physical sensation, a difficult emotion, or difficult thought, and just recognizing that it's there. So again, another tip that can be very useful if your mind is very busy and you're having this challenging thought about something and it's consistent, is actually just to say, I accept the thought. And what that can do is if you accept the thought, it gives you a bit of space from the thought and it allows, again, decentering to happen. So you have the ability to see the thought more objectively, the one that's causing all the challenges for you. So by accepting your experiencing, you reduce your kind of physical and emotional kind of resistance to whatever is going on in the moment. And there's an experience I had recently with somebody who was doing a mindfulness program I was delivering, and she had experienced chronic pain, but she was doing it in the context of a professional group. She was a social worker. And she said basically like she'd almost forget she has a chronic pain condition because she's in her mind so often. And because she's in her mind so often, she doesn't accept the fact she's in physical pain. And that creates a lot of internalized anger and aggression towards herself because she doesn't take into account that she's actually contending with the various other aspects that's going on at any one time. So acceptance of all that allows the full person to come through. So not just thoughts, emotions, physical sensations, but the full sense of self can be there. And acceptance can also be very, very healthy thing to do for things you can't change. So if you can't change something, going and experiencing difficult emotions and physical sensations and thoughts around that, it's better to engage with those, feel them, allow them to rise and pass, and accept it, and then move on, because it'll stop you from running into these kind of walls in relation to your experience that you can't do anything about. So it can be very productive from that perspective. And one of the really, and we're seeing this more in research, one of the massive benefits of visual effects of mindfulness is developing of self-compassion. So oftentimes if you have a health condition or we feel stigmatized or various issues going on in our lives at a period of time, if we're particularly mind focused, our mind will be tend to be quite self-critical. And again, that can exacerbate stress, that can make things a lot worse for us in that context. So actually the ability to stay present increases our capacity to connect to our sense of selves and actually be more connected to ourselves and be kinder to ourselves when we're having a difficult experience. And that, in that context, that actually helps again to release a lot of negative thinking that might be there in our consciousness, and again help us to relax on the physical level as well. So mindful actually probably gone over a bit of time, so apologies for that. But just one thing of note is say that anybody can practice mindfulness anytime. So your breathing is there at all times. So if you focus on your breathing, you're practicing mindfulness. And the sleep aids that Lisa mentioned is really, really good. But actually developing a sustained practice over time is very challenging. The reason being is that when you start practicing mindfulness without the support of a facilitator, your mind will start to play tricks on you. So it'll start to tell you, my voice is playing tricks on me now, but it'll start to tell you that essentially, you're not good at this. People will oftentimes in the first couple of weeks of programs I've delivered to say, I'm not good at this. Like, I'm not able to do this. Again, that's the mind kind of developing an idea that basically trying to stop you from engagement to progress. Excuse me. So it's going to help you to basically, it'll stop you from actually engaging fully with the program, with a practice, and you may stop engaging mindfulness entirely. And a lot of people stop engaging programs because of that. So my advice is, if you're interested in engaging in mindfulness program, there are mindfulness programs out there that are reference based. So mindfulness-based stress reduction is one, and it's an 8-week program, and you can do it for 2 hours a week, and you get homework practices, and you'll get the support of peers, but also a facilitator to support you to learn on your journey. And then mindfulness-based cognitive therapies and other interventions very similar to mindfulness-based stress reduction, but it's actually focused on low mood. So if you want to engage in mindfulness and you're also experiencing some low mood or issues with how you're feeling emotional level, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy can be really beneficial to develop the understanding of that. So thanks for your attention, and apologies for my voice breaking there. And I'll hand you over to Maria.
Thanks, Alan. I've been preemptively sipping a lot of water here, so the similar thing tends to happen to me. So hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. So my name is Dr. Maria Pertl, and I'm going to talk to you today about the value of social connections. So I suppose the first point to say is that positive social connections.
Sorry, Lisa, or sorry, Maria, can I just check? Sorry, I can't hear you very well. I'm not sure if anybody else is having trouble hearing you.
Do you know what I might do is I
that's
might
better.
try ditching the earphones.
That's much better. Is that okay for everybody else?
Better?
Yeah. Great.
Okay, great. Thanks for flagging that.
No problem.
So I suppose the first thing to say is that positive social connections is one of the 6 pillars of lifestyle medicine. And I want to reiterate that because it's, I think, the most neglected one. So generally, when we think of things to improve our lifestyles, we're thinking of physical activity, diet, sleep, and so on. And social connections is often the last one we think of. And it's also kind of the last one we teach to healthcare professionals. So I'm teaching in a medical university, and a lot of the time, the other aspects are covered, but very little attention is placed onto social connections. But we know that there is substantial evidence that loneliness and social isolation are associated with poorer health outcomes in many, many different areas, and that being connected to others in our social relationships is really good for our health. So if we think about the impact of social connections and where the evidence is, so we know that it impacts on our mood when we connect meaningfully with other people, so it leads to greater feelings of well-being and happiness. Social connectedness is also associated with higher quality of life. It has a huge impact on our mental health and helps with feelings of stress and anxiety and depression. It also supports our brain health or our cognitive health. So when we talk regularly and engage meaningfully with others, it helps to keep our brains active. So it's kind of like exercise for the brain, essentially. There's also lots of evidence that it's associated with our physical health. So we know that loneliness and social isolation are associated with higher incidence of lots of chronic diseases, especially cardiovascular disease, stroke, diabetes, dementia, and it also impacts on our immune system. So how well our immune system functions and how well we're able to recover from illness as well. There's also evidence that it's associated with clinical outcomes. So for example, lower social connectedness is associated with greater hospitalization and greater medical care costs. And perhaps the strongest evidence is in relation to mortality. So it's estimated that loneliness is associated with a 30% higher risk of early death. And that's really comparable, if not greater, than many other widely recognized risk factors like smoking, excessive alcohol consumption, obesity, physical activity, and even medical interventions like hypertensive medications and flu vaccinations, for example. So because of the strength of the evidence in this area, the WHO has actually launched a commission on social connection, and that was launched in November 2023. And that really outlines a 3-year global effort to mobilize awareness, action, and support for solutions to tackle social isolation and loneliness. So there's really growing recognition that social connectedness is really important for our health. But I suppose before talking further about it, I think it's also important to clarify what we mean by social connectedness. So I've referred to loneliness and social isolation, and I've used those two terms very deliberately because they're different things. So they refer to different things. So it's possible for us to feel lonely without being socially isolated. And you can be socially isolated but not feel lonely. But both of them are risk factors for health. So loneliness really refers to a feeling of being alone or isolated. So it's a subjective experience. And it's basically a negative feeling that we have when we're unhappy or dissatisfied with the difference between the actual quality or size of our social connections and what we expect or want to have. So it's the difference between what we would like and what we are actually experiencing. Social isolation, on the other hand, refers to a lack of social contact or support. So it's more objective, and we can measure it more objectively by looking at a person's social network. So a social network refers to the number of people we're connected with and the frequency of those connections and the closeness of those connections. So our social networks generally consist of our families, spouses, partners, friendships, colleagues in work, our neighbours, casual acquaintances that we have. And a really important point is that all human beings are social creatures. So just by nature of being human, we are social. We all depend on connections to other people. But what that looks like for one person is going to be different. So it's going to vary hugely from person to person. So we're not all extroverts. We don't all need to be surrounded by people all the time. And what's right for you isn't going to be right for someone else. So the ideal social network is very different for different people, but we do all need some sort of social network of some kind, just purely because we're humans and that's how we're programmed. And our social networks can also change throughout our lives. So a lot of the time people will experience that, over time, the size of people's social networks tends to diminish, and, other factors can impact on that, the stage of life we're at, how busy we are. COVID, obviously, a huge impact there as well. But there are ways that we can prevent our social networks from reducing, and talk a little bit about that in a minute. So social connectedness really then is an umbrella term that includes a number of different aspects of social relationships that include the structure of those relationships, so the number and types of relationships we have, the function of those relationships, so the actual or perceived support that we have and how included we feel, and also the quality of social relationships, so whether those relationships are positive or they're negative. So insufficient social connectedness then can result from poor quality social connections or insufficient social connection. But either way, it can negatively impact on our health. So it's important to also think about, well, why does that happen? What mediates those relationships between social connectedness and health? And there are lots of different pathways for this, and most likely it'll be a combination of some or all of these. So essentially, social connectedness provides us with social support, and social support can influence our health in a number of different ways. So it provides us with psychological support, first of all. It creates a sense of connection and well-being. When we feel we have social support, it impacts how we perceive stress. So whether a situation is even seen as stressful or not, when we feel socially supported, sometimes a situation that might be stressful otherwise isn't seen as stressful because we feel we can manage that with the resources that we have through other people. So it impacts on things like perceived stress and depressive symptoms and anxiety symptoms. And there's also evidence that it actually helps to lower our blood pressure and boost our immune functioning as well through that. Social support also supports, lifestyles that impact on our health. So we know that lots of different lifestyle factors impact on chronic disease development and progression. And social support provides us with social encouragement, also social norms that guide our behavior. So for example, lots of health behaviors around physical activity, sleep, smoking, diet are impacted by our social networks. So we're more likely to be physically active when the people around us are physically active. We're more likely to go to bed earlier and have good sleep hygiene when everyone in our household have that as well. Smoking is hugely influenced by our peers, and the same with diet as well. So social networks create kind of social norms that influence our behavior, but they also provide us with social encouragement. So when we decide to make a lifestyle change, like when we want to become more physically active or change how we eat or stop smoking, we know the evidence supports that if we tell other people that this is what we want to do, we have a much greater chance of success because other people provide us with support and encouragement for that. Social support also provides us with tangible, it's called instrumental support. So, and this is basically help with day-to-day tasks, everyday tasks. So things like if you have people in your close social network who can help you with things like shopping and cleaning or taking medication, getting to appointments, that all has an impact on our health. And even things like providing financial support that can diminish stress as well, or providing care for us when we're sick and we can't do those tasks for ourselves. So instrumental support is another link between social connectedness and health. And then finally, it also provides us with informational support. So we get advice and sharing of knowledge through our social connections. People can introduce us to other people who might be in a similar situation as us and that we can meaningfully connect with. It helps us to feel less lonely. Can diminish kind of psychological loneliness when we know that other people are going through something similar, or kind of validate our feelings. Other ways of providing informational support as well, like providing referrals or tips or tricks for dealing with particular situations to support our well-being. And this is where support groups are really, really important and play such a key role, because often, your healthcare provider will give you information and is really valuable. And it's obviously very important to check in with your healthcare provider and ask them questions. But sometimes we hear really valuable things through other people who have a similar condition to us that maybe our healthcare provider didn't think of. And then, what works for somebody else mightn't necessarily work for us, but sometimes we can get really useful tips, and then we can talk to our own doctor and say, I heard somebody did this. Would that be something that would suit me? And this is where often those kind of wider social networks. So not necessarily the people who are in our immediate close social networks are really valuable. So because those incidental encounters with other people, or conversations you have with someone at the bus stop, or you know, someone you might know loosely from attending a health centre or a support group, can provide us with really, really valuable information. And those wider social networks are really important there. So say, for example, one of my children has Down syndrome, and I'm in a number of kind of parent groups and support groups for families who have a member with Down syndrome. And I found so much helpful information just from chatting to other people. And, you know, their solutions aren't necessarily my solutions, but it definitely opens up the realm of possibilities. And I've learned so much from other people's experiences that way, that I found really, really valuable, and kind of helped me to understand my needs and my family's needs more. So there's lots of different routes through which social connectedness can impact on health and health outcomes. So finally, I just want to talk very briefly about how you can develop your social support system and help others to develop theirs as well. And I suppose it's important as well in this context to acknowledge that it can be really challenging with conditions like arthritis, because pain and physical limitations can also contribute to isolation and kind of psychological loneliness. We can feel, you know, that we're alone in our experience. And it can also obviously make it difficult to get out and socialize sometimes, depending on how we're feeling physically. And it can be difficult to ask for help sometimes. So there are lots of different things that we can do to try and develop and maintain our social support systems, always remembering that the optimal support system for you might be different to someone else. So, you know, it's not the case that we all need to have as many social contacts as possible. That mightn't be right for you, but it's about finding, you know, deciding for yourself what you need, and then, you know, if you feel that you want to increase your social connectedness, identifying ways that you can do that. So the first point really is to try and stay in contact to maintain existing connections with your family and friends. And often over time, you know, we can lose touch with people. That happens very frequently, and happens to everyone. It's a very natural thing. People get busy, and then before you know it, a few weeks have passed before you've caught up with a friend. So it's really helpful to schedule regular get-togethers. If you have a group of friends, put a date in the diary where every month you get together, or set little goals for yourself, like to reach out to one person every day. And it can be something simple like just sending a text message or making a phone call. You don't have to talk to somebody on the phone for an hour every day, but just sending a quick email or a message can kind of just help to maintain those relationships. The second one is to keep learning. So it's really a great way to get to know other people who have similar interests. If you try and find local or online classes or internet-based groups that can help you to develop new skills that you're interested in, or trying to revisit old hobbies or interests that you had. And there's so many available here. It completely depends on what you're interested in. So art classes, languages, could be computer programming, bird watching, whatever it is. But it's a great way to connect with others because you already have a shared interest. So it's much easier to chat to people in that context because you have something already to talk about. Getting active is also a great way to connect people and also to stay physically fit. So ticking off another pillar of lifestyle medicine there. And again, there's lots of local groups that, you know, and it's important to find an activity that you enjoy, because you're not going to keep doing it unless you enjoy it. So walking, football, dancing, whatever it is. And I've put a link there for Sport Ireland. They have a great resource for identifying local things in your community that you might want to link in with, or that you maybe didn't know were there, that you might be interested in taking up. Helping others. So connecting helping other people to connect is a way of connecting you as well. And we know, of course, that volunteering is hugely beneficial for our own health, and helping others can also increase our social connections. So there's lots of opportunities for volunteering, for example, for befriending services through a loan, or even just volunteering at your local park run. So it doesn't have to be something like a standing commitment that you do all the time. But, you know, park run, that's a kind of a favorite of mine. You can just volunteer 1 week and then not volunteer again for a few weeks. So it's not a commitment that you have to plan way in advance. It's just the week beforehand. And park run is a great organization because, you know, you can increase your physical activity that way. But even if you never actually do park run yourself, you can join that community, and there's a great social community around it. And you can go and volunteer and just be a marshal or a timekeeper. And they're so welcoming of everyone. So it's a really great way to build social connections in your local area. Getting involved. So to increase your connections and people's capacity to develop connections in their community. There's lots of opportunities through your kind of local neighborhoods to try and get involved and build up not just your connections, but also other people's capacity to build connections. So you can have an impact on the actual built environment and the neighborhoods that are around you, to make them more amenable for facilitating connections. So, for example, getting involved in tidy towns to try and create public spaces in your neighborhoods or local community groups. Community Roots is a lovely organization where they connect garden owners with garden-less budding growers that live nearby. So they're matched together, and somebody who doesn't have a garden creates a vegetable patch in somebody else's garden. And so you're connecting people who are living close by to one another, and they're growing food together. And there's lots of resources that Community Roots provides to facilitate that, and lots of get-together. So it's a really lovely organization that really supports local neighborhood connections. Getting online then as well. So again, it's a great way to engage with people who have similar interests or similar conditions. So there are support groups online that are really useful ways. So some people, you know, it's not for everyone, but some people find these really, really helpful to chat to people who have maybe similar concerns, and there are resources available as well. This is a webinar, so maybe not as relevant here, but you might know someone who might benefit from resources for helping them to get online, and Age Action has some great resources for that. And then finally, just reaching out to other people. So the Arthritis Ireland helpline was mentioned already, and this can be really great for providing support for managing symptoms. There are also social prescribing groups available and programs available. So social prescribing is basically a way of enabling doctors and other healthcare professionals to refer patients to a social prescriber or a link worker, and they can provide them with a kind of a face-to-face consultation, during which they talk about the kind of possibilities for coming up with some solutions, so that people who have social, emotional, or practical needs are kind of empowered to find solutions to improve their health and well-being, often using services that are provided by the community or the voluntary sector. So say opportunities in the local community for increasing physical activity or joining social groups. And I've put a link there for the All Ireland Prescribing Network, where there's a list of social prescribing programs throughout Ireland. And then finally, gov.ie as well. There's a link there, has great resources for different volunteering opportunities and different groups available nationwide as well, that you know you might find interesting, or there are lots of opportunities for connecting with others through that too. So I think, you know, there's lots of ways that we can increase our social connections, and it can be a bit overwhelming to think of, you know, you don't have to do all of these. I would suggest starting small, just set small goals for yourself, like reach out to one person per week, or, you know, start with maybe trying to connect with a local group, or whatever interests you, but you don't have to do everything, but just try and find one thing and then build it up over time. So I hope that's been helpful. Sorry, we're at 1 o'clock already. I was trying to speed through that.
No problem.
So
Thanks so much, Maria. That was a fantastic overview. Really appreciate that. And thanks also to Alan and Lisa for your presentations as well. They were really brilliant. We really appreciate it. We've had a few questions, and I think Lisa, you've been responding to some of them in the Q&A already. I know somebody had a question just about Kindles and the light in the evening, and whether or not that is something that you know, that it might disrupt their sleep. I'm not sure if you already got to that question.
Yeah, so I just tied back to Anne that again, reading for bed, it really switches off our mind. It helps us to relax, but make sure the light on the Kindle is turned down as low as possible. And there is blue light filters on Kindle, so I would strongly recommend using those. And somebody just asked a question about melatonin, just to flag that, you know, try and avoid if possible. It isn't available over the counter in Ireland. You have to get it on prescription. And I would very much talk to your doctor. A lot of people, when they fly to America, they go into the pharmacy and buy it and bring it back. Don't do that. Talk to your doctor, because you want that natural body clock rhythm. So try your sleep hygiene, or speak to your doctor about that.
Okay, great advice. Thank you very much, Lisa. It is actually something that I think a lot of people are using more and more. So
and they're probably using it incorrectly. So I really would speak to your doctor before you use it.
Okay. Alan, somebody asked about yoga nidra. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, but I think it's a form of yoga that's helpful for meditation. I'm not sure if you've heard of it before, if it's something that you'd recommend.
Yeah, I should see there's another question there that I couldn't answer too. Yeah, yoga. So yoga is kind of like a mindfulness-based practice, and kind of can be defined that way. It's more movement focused than kind of mindfulness, kind of some breathing exercises. So, again, anything that kind of connects you to the present, and yoga exercises are very good at doing that, because you have to focus on what you're doing at each time, and you're using gentle stretches, so you're connected with the physical sensations more, and interconnecting the thoughts, emotions, physical sensations is a good practice. So, yoga is got a good evidence base as well for mental health outcomes, and also for physical health outcomes as well. So definitely a good practice to do, and a very healthy one. Just I saw that one, I'm not sure this comes up everyone. There was actually any Irish research studies looking at mindfulness stress reduction and psoriasis. My PhD is ironically was actually on that, so there is, and I'm the author of them. So we did a randomized controlled trial looking at mindfulness cognitive therapy, and it worked for mental health outcomes, and it worked for psoriasis symptoms as well. The measure, I would say, wasn't amazing, so I wouldn't be massively confident about the result, but it seemed to work well. But the stress definitely reduced, and we did do focus group with the effect. So what I'll do is I'll find that resource, and I'll pop them into the chat there as well.
Oh, brilliant. That's great. Thank you very much for that, Alan.
No worries.
And Maria, just one thing that I thought just occurred to me there when we were talking about the social connections. Our Living Well with Arthritis program, and a lot of our other self-management programs, they are a great way for people, obviously, to learn how to manage their condition, but they're also a great way for people to connect with people in a similar situation. And we often find that people who attend our Living Well with Arthritis program and then attend other programs, they sometimes develop a network of support through that. So it can be a great starting point. And they're also available online as well for people who may not be able to travel to a particular destination, or physically might not be able to get to a destination. They are run around, we run them nationwide, as well as also we run adapted exercise programs and Living Well with Pain programs, but they can be a great way for people to connect with other people who are going through similar situations. So just if that's something that might be helpful for some people who are listening in. And really what the whole webinar was just brilliant, but it really brought into focus the connection between all three of those pillars and the impact they have on our health outcomes. So thank you so much for all of your time and your input and your expertise. And also to Lisa as well, who very much helped me put together the lineup for today's webinar and for Tuesday. It's been fantastic and we really, really appreciate it. And just to let everybody know that this webinar was recorded and will be on our YouTube channel afterwards. And if you have any queries or questions, or if you want to connect with Arthritis Ireland, our website is arthritisireland.ie, and our helpline for anyone who needs support is 0818 252 846. They'll be happy to take your call. So thank you very much, everybody. We're going to end there. Sorry, we ran a little bit over time, but I think the content really warranted that. So thanks again to everybody for attending, and also to our speakers today.
Thanks, everyone.
You.
Thank you.